The scent hit Dominic Kane like a fist to the chest. He stopped mid-sentence, his hand frozen over the territorial map spread across his desk, and his wolf surged forward with a violence that made his vision blur. Child, Jasmine. And underneath it all, something that didn't belong in his carefully controlled world, something that made every instinct he possessed roar to life. Alpha? Marcus, his beta, leaned forward, concern etching lines around his eyes. What is it? Dominic couldn't answer, couldn't move, because standing in his doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, was a little girl who couldn't be more than 4 years old. And she had his eyes. Not similar, not close. His eyes. That exact shade of amber that ran through the Kane bloodline. Flecked with gold that caught the light when the wolf was close to the surface. The child tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made his breath catch. She should have been afraid. Everyone was afraid of him. His reputation as the ruthless alpha of Shadow Ridge Pack wasn't exaggerated. He'd built it deliberately, brick by bloody brick, after that night 5 years ago when everything changed. But this child just smiled. "Hi," she said, her voice sweet and clear. "You smell nice." Behind him, Marcus choked on what might have been a laugh. Dominic barely heard it over the pounding of his heart. "Emma," a harried voice called from down the hallway. "Emma, sweetie, where are you?" The little girl, Emma, ignored the call. She walked into his office like she owned it, dragging her rabbit behind her, and stopped right in front of his desk. Up close, Dominic could see more. The curve of her chin, the way her hair fell in dark waves, the small hands that looked too much like his sister's had at that age. "You have a mark," Emma announced, pointing at his neck where his collar had shifted. "Mommy has one just like it." The world stopped. The crescent moon birthmark on his neck was rare, so rare that only direct Kane bloodline carried it. His father had it, his grandfather. One in a generation, the pack elders said, marking the true alpha line. "What's your mother's name?" The words came out rough, barely human. "Sarah," Emma said simply. "We just moved back. Mommy said this was home, but she cried after. She cries sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping." Sarah Mitchell, the woman who'd walked into the Moonlight Tavern 5 years ago. Human and completely unaware that she'd just stumbled into werewolf territory. The woman who'd looked at him across a crowded room and smiled like he was just a man, not an alpha, not a monster. The woman he'd spent one night with, one perfect, impossible night, before she vanished like smoke. He'd told himself he'd forgotten her. Told himself that the human woman who'd somehow slipped past every defense he'd built didn't matter. That the ache in his chest when he woke to find her gone was just wounded pride. He'd been lying. His wolf had been searching for her scent on every wind for 5 years. Emma Marie Mitchell. The daycare worker burst into the office, red-faced and panting. "I'm so sorry, Alpha Kane. She slipped away during snack time, and I didn't..." The woman's eyes went wide with horror. "She didn't disturb you, did she? I swear it won't happen again. It's fine." Dominic's voice came out cold, controlled, even though nothing was fine. Nothing would ever be fine again. He looked at Marcus, whose face had gone carefully blank. "Clear the room. Everyone out." The daycare worker grabbed Emma's hand, already backing toward the door, but the little girl resisted. "Wait," she said, digging in her heels with surprising strength. "I want to ask him something. Emma, we need to go now." "Are you sad too?" Emma looked up at Dominic with those impossible eyes. His eyes. "Like Mommy?" The question hit harder than it should have. Harder than any blow he'd taken in the territorial battles that had made his name feared across 3 states. Sometimes, he admitted, and the truth of it shocked him more than the lie would have. Emma's smile was devastating. "Then I'll bring Mommy to meet you. She needs friends. And maybe you can make each other happy instead of sad." She said it with the absolute certainty of a child who still believed the world was simple, that broken things could be fixed with a kind word and a hug. Dominic wanted to tell her she was wrong, wanted to explain that some things stayed broken, that some wounds never healed. But he couldn't speak past the vise around his chest. The daycare worker managed to pull Emma toward the door, still apologizing in a frantic stream. The little girl waved at him over her shoulder, and then she was gone, taking that scent, that impossible, devastating scent, with her. The door clicked shut, silence pressed down like a weight. Marcus cleared his throat. Don't. Dominic gripped the edge of his desk hard enough that the wood cracked under his fingers. His wolf was thrashing inside him, demanding he go after the child, track down her mother, claim what was his. But nothing was his. He'd made sure of that 5 years ago when he'd pushed everyone away, when he'd buried everything soft inside him and become the alpha his pack needed. Cold, controlled, untouchable. A daughter. He might have a daughter. The thought was terrifying and wonderful and completely impossible. Find her, he said quietly. Find Sarah Mitchell. I want to know everything. Where she's been, why she left, why she came back. He lifted his eyes to meet Marcus's worried gaze. And Marcus, I want to know why she never told me I had a daughter. His beta nodded and headed for the door, but paused with his hand on the frame. What if there's a reason? A good reason? Then she can tell me herself, Dominic said, right before I decide whether to forgive her or destroy her for keeping my child from me. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Because Emma had her mother's smile, he remembered it now, remembered how Sarah had smiled at him in the darkness, how she'd touched his face like he was something precious instead of something to fear. And he knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that he'd forgive Sarah Mitchell anything. He just had to survive seeing her again first. The office door closed. Dominic was alone with the scattered maps and the lingering scent of jasmine and the terrible knowledge that his carefully constructed walls had just been demolished by a 4-year-old girl with a stuffed rabbit in his eyes. Somewhere out there, Sarah Mitchell was crying. And Dominic Kane, the feared alpha of Shadow Ridge Pack, was about to discover that the worst wounds weren't the ones dealt by enemies. They were the ones that came from hope you'd thought was dead, rising from the ashes to burn you all over again. Chapter 2. Sarah's hands were steady as she chopped vegetables for dinner. Years of practice had taught her how to keep them that way. Steady hands, calm face, heart locked behind walls that nothing could breach. The small apartment kitchen was warm, sunlight slanting through the window over the sink. And everything was normal. Everything was safe. Then Emma burst through the door. "Mommy, Mommy, guess what?" Her daughter's voice was bright with excitement, and Sarah's heart clenched the way it always did when Emma smiled. That smile, those eyes. Every day her daughter looked more like him. "What, baby?" Sarah kept her voice light, kept chopping, kept pretending the world wasn't always one wrong move away from shattering. "I met the nicest man today. He has a moon mark just like yours right here." Emma touched her own neck, in the exact spot where Sarah's crescent-shaped birthmark sat hidden beneath her collar. "And he has pretty eyes like mine, and he smells like pine trees and something else, something that made my chest feel funny and warm, and—" The knife clattered to the cutting board. Sarah's blood turned to ice in her veins. "What man?" "Emma." The words came out too sharp. "Where did you meet him?" Emma's smile faltered. "At the daycare. I got lost looking for the bathroom and found his office, and he was there, and—" "Mommy, why do you look scared?" Because Dominic Kane was never supposed to know about his daughter. Because Sarah had spent 5 years running, hiding, building a life in the shadows to keep Emma safe. Because she'd just made the most catastrophic mistake of her life by enrolling her daughter in a pack-affiliated daycare, and now everything was going to fall apart. I'm not scared, sweetheart. Sarah forced her hands to unclench, forced her wolf back down, where it had been howling since the moment Emma said, Moonmark. Tell me about this man. Did he say anything to you? He asked about you. Emma climbed onto a kitchen chair, eye-winging her legs. He seemed sad, Mommy, like you get sad sometimes. That's why I told him maybe you could be friends, because then neither of you would be sad anymore. Oh, God, no. Sarah's knees went weak. She gripped the counter, memories flooding back with vicious clarity. Memories she'd spent 5 years trying to bury. 5 years ago, the Moonlight Tavern, the peace delegation. Sarah had been 23 and terrified, sent by Alpha Thorne as part of the Riverside Pack's attempt to negotiate territorial boundaries with the legendary Shadow Ridge Pack. She was an Omega, supposedly non-threatening, but Thorne had been clear about her real purpose. Observe Alpha Kane, report back on any weaknesses. She'd expected a monster. The stories painted Dominic Kane as ruthless cold, a wolf who'd torn apart 3 rival packs and rebuilt his own with an iron fist. They said he'd changed after some incident years before, that whatever softness he'd once possessed had been burned away. But when she walked into that tavern and saw him sitting alone at the bar, nothing about him matched the stories. Yes, he was powerful. She felt that in her bones, in the way her wolf instinctively submitted even across the room. Yes, he was dangerous. The scars on his hands told stories of violence she couldn't imagine. But his eyes had been so tired. He'd looked at her like she was a lifeline, and Sarah had known instantly, terribly, that she was in trouble. One drink. That's all she'd meant it to be. One conversation with the enemy Alpha, gathering intelligence for her pack. But Dominic had talked to her like she was a person. Not an Omega to be dismissed or a tool to be used. He'd made her laugh. He'd listened when she talked about missing her mother, about the pressure of pack politics, about feeling like she'd never quite fit anywhere. And when he'd asked if she wanted to get out of there, when he'd offered his hand with a vulnerability that cracked her heart open, she'd taken it. One night, that's all they'd had. One perfect, impossible night where she wasn't an Omega spy and he wasn't a feared Alpha. Where they were just Sarah and Dominic, 2 people carrying too much weight, finding unexpected gentleness in each other. She'd fallen asleep in his arms, feeling safer than she'd ever felt in her life. She'd woken up to a text message from Thorne. Get out now. Richard knows what you are. He's coming for you. Richard, Dominic's beta at the time. The wolf who'd orchestrated the death of Dominic's previous love interest, Clara, 3 years before when she'd refused to be used as breeding stock for Richard's coup attempt. The wolf who'd been building a conspiracy for years, waiting for the perfect leverage. Sarah had run. She'd grabbed her clothes, fled Dominic's apartment while he slept, and barely made it back to Riverside territory before Richard's wolves found her trail. 2 weeks later, she'd discovered she was pregnant, and 2 days after that, Thorne had come to her with the deal that would shape the next 5 years of her life. Richard will kill that child the moment he finds out it exists, Thorne had said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. He'll use it to control Dominic, or worse, he'll eliminate it as a threat to his own plans for Shadow Ridge. You have 2 choices, Sarah. Run and hope Richard never finds you. Or let me help. Help how? We fake your death. I spread word that you were killed in a car accident, that the body was badly burned. Richard will have no reason to keep searching. You disappear into neutral territory, the human cities where pack politics can't reach you. You keep that child safe, and in return, you send me information on human-wolf relations. Nothing dangerous. Just observations. And Dominic? Thorne's expression had been pitying. Dominic can never know. If he knows that child exists, he'll move heaven and earth to find it, and the moment he does, Richard will strike. The only way to keep everyone safe, your child, Dominic, even yourself, is to disappear completely. He'll think I abandoned him. Better he think that than attend your funeral. Or your daughter's. So Sarah had agreed. She'd let Thorne stage her death. She'd moved to neutral territory, taken a human identity, and spent 5 years looking over her shoulder while her daughter grew up asking why they never stayed in one place for long. She'd convinced herself she was doing the right thing. She'd convinced herself that Dominic was better off without her. She'd convinced herself that the ache in her chest would eventually fade. All lies. "Mommy!" Emma's voice pulled Sarah back to the present. "Why are you crying?" Sarah touched her face, surprised to find tears. "I'm okay, baby. Just remembering something." "Something about the nice man?" The nice man. Dominic. The father Emma had never known, who'd never even known she existed. Sarah's mind raced. The daycare was PAC-affiliated. She'd missed that crucial detail in her hurry to find somewhere safe while she looked for work. If Emma had wandered into Dominic's office, if he'd seen her, seen those impossible eyes, he would know, instantly. Dominic wasn't stupid, which meant Sarah had maybe 48 hours before he tracked her down. Less if he called in Marcus. Marcus had been his third back then, but from what little PAC gossip Sarah had intercepted over the years, he was beta now, which meant her stomach dropped, which meant Richard was gone. "Oh God," Sarah whispered, "he's gone. Richard's gone, and I didn't know, and Mommy, you're scaring me." Sarah dropped to her knees in front of Emma, gripping her daughter's small hands. "Baby, I need you to listen very carefully. That man you met today, we can't see him again. We have to leave, tonight. We have to—" "No." Emma's face crumpled. "I don't want to leave. You promised we could stay this time. You promised." "I know, sweetheart, I know, but it's not safe." "You always say that." Emma yanked her hands away, tears streaming down her face. "You always say it's not safe and we have to go, but I want to stay. I want to go to school with the same kids and have friends and not live in motels anymore." Each word was a knife to Sarah's heart. "Emma," and he was nice, Mommy. "He looked at me like I mattered, and nobody ever looks at me like that except you. And I thought, maybe... Emma broke off, sobbing, and Sarah pulled her close, even as her own heart shattered. Her daughter was right. They'd been running for so long that Emma had never had a real home, real friends, a real life. And now, when they'd finally tried to settle down, Sarah's past had caught up with them. It always did. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered into Emma's hair. "I'm so sorry, baby." She held her daughter until the sobs subsided, until Emma went limp with exhaustion. Then Sarah carried her to the small bedroom they shared, tucked her into bed and returned to the kitchen with a heart full of determination and dread. She had to pack, had to prepare, had to figure out where they could go this time, how far they'd have to run before... A flyer on the counter caught her eye. Shadow Ridge PAC Community Services, it read, with a phone number printed beneath the cheerful logo. The daycare must have sent it home with Emma weeks ago. Sarah had barely glanced at it then, too focused on finding work to pay attention to the details. Now she stared at that phone number like it was a loaded gun. She should throw it away, should pack their bags and be gone before midnight. That was the smart play, the safe play. But Emma's words echoed in her mind. "You promised we could stay this time. You promised." And underneath that, a more dangerous thought. What if Richard really is gone? What if the threat doesn't exist anymore? What if she'd been running for nothing? Sarah picked up her phone with shaking hands. She could call. She could just call and ask. No, that was insane. She couldn't call the PAC. She couldn't risk... A small noise made her turn. Emma stood in the kitchen doorway, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, her face set with the stubborn determination she'd inherited from her father. "I already called him," Emma said in a small voice. The world stopped. "What?" "The nice man. I called him." Emma held up Sarah's phone. When had she taken it? How had Sarah not noticed? I used the number on the flyer. I asked him please not to make you sad anymore. Sarah's knees gave out. She sank into a chair, staring at her daughter, at the phone, at the flyer with that damning number. When? The word barely made it past her lips. When did you call? Right before dinner, when you were in the bathroom. Emma's lower lip trembled. He answered. He said. The phone in Emma's hand began to ring. They both stared at it. The screen lit up with an unknown number, but Sarah knew, God, she knew, who was on the other end of that call. Mommy? Emma whispered. It's him again. He said he'd call back. He said he had questions. Sarah's hand moved without conscious thought. She took the phone, stared at that ringing screen while her heart tried to beat its way out of her chest. 5 years. 5 years of running, of hiding, of protecting her daughter from a threat that maybe didn't exist anymore. 5 years of telling herself that Dominic was better off without her, that he'd moved on, that the connection they'd shared was just one night and nothing more. 5 years of lying to herself. The phone kept ringing. Emma watched her with those amber eyes, his eyes, and Sarah made a choice. Maybe the wrong choice. Maybe the choice that would destroy everything she'd built. But Emma deserved better than a life spent running, and Dominic. Dominic deserved the truth. Sarah answered the call. Sarah. His voice hit her like a physical blow, deeper than she remembered, rougher, but still his. Still the voice that had whispered her name in the darkness 5 years ago. Don't hang up. Dominic. Is she mine? 3 words. That's all it took to demolish the last of her defences. Yes, Sarah whispered, and felt the weight of 5 years of secrets crash down around her. She's yours. Silence on the other end. Sarah closed her eyes, waiting for the anger, the accusations, the fury she deserved. Instead, Dominic's voice came again, so quiet she almost missed it. Why? I need to explain. Then explain. You have until I reach your door, Sarah. Marcus is tracking this call as we speak. You have maybe 20 minutes. A pause. And if you run, I will find you. If it takes the rest of my life, I will find you. So talk. Tell me why you stole 5 years of my daughter's life from me. The call didn't disconnect. He was coming. He was actually coming. And Sarah had 20 minutes to explain 5 years of choices that had seemed so clear at the time and so impossible to justify now. She looked at Emma, who'd climbed into her lap, small and warm and trusting. Okay, Sarah said into the phone to the man she'd tried so hard to forget. I'll tell you everything. But Dominic, Richard's gone, isn't he? That's why Marcus is beta now. Another pause. Richard's dead. I killed him myself 2 years ago when I found out what he'd done, what he'd been planning. His voice turned to gravel. What does Richard have to do with this? And Sarah realised, with a horror that made her stomach turn, that she'd been running from a ghost, that the threat she'd sacrificed everything to escape had been eliminated years ago, and she'd never known. That she'd kept Dominic from his daughter for 2 years longer than necessary because she'd been too afraid to check, too committed to the lie, too convinced that running was the only way to keep everyone safe. Everything, she whispered. Richard has everything to do with this. And as she heard the sound of a car engine through the phone, Dominic, already on his way, already closing the distance she'd spent 5 years maintaining, Sarah held her daughter close and prepared to face the consequences of choices made in fear and love and desperate hope that somehow, impossibly, she'd been doing the right thing. The truth, it turned out, had been waiting for her all along. She just hadn't been brave enough to face it until a 4-year-old girl with her father's eyes decided that sad people should be friends instead. Chapter 3. The storm hit at 11:45. Sarah stood at the window of their small apartment, watching lightning split the sky over the city, and knew with absolute certainty that the real storm was still coming. The one that would arrive in a black SUV with a man she'd tried desperately to forget, carrying 5 years of questions she didn't know how to answer. Thunder rolled across the darkness, and Emma stirred in her sleep. Sarah checked on her daughter for the 3rd time in 20 minutes, still peaceful, still dreaming, still innocent of the chaos about to descend. Her stuffed rabbit was tucked under one arm, and in sleep she looked even more like Dominic, the curve of her jaw, the way her hair fell across her forehead, those impossible eyes hidden behind closed lids. What have I done? The question had been repeating in Sarah's mind since that phone call 2 hours ago, since she'd heard Dominic's voice crack when he asked why, since she'd realised that the threat she'd been running from had been eliminated years ago, and she'd kept running anyway, kept hiding, kept Emma from her father because she'd been too afraid to check if the danger was real. Headlights swept across the window. Sarah's heart stopped. A black SUV pulled up to the curb below, rain hammering against its roof, and even from 3 stories up, Sarah could feel the power radiating from the man who stepped out. Dominic didn't bother with an umbrella. He just stood there in the downpour, head tilted back, looking up at her window, like he could see through walls and shadows to where she stood frozen. Then he moved toward the building entrance, and Sarah had maybe 60 seconds before. The knock came at her door. Not a knock really, 3 measured strikes that somehow conveyed authority, demand, and barely contained violence all at once. Sarah's wolf whimpered. After 5 years of silence, after 5 years of Sarah forcing her down and pretending she was human, her wolf recognized that sound. Recognized him. Alpha. Mate. The bond they'd formed that one perfect night had never broken, no matter how far Sarah ran. She crossed to the door on shaking legs, put her hand on the knob, took one breath, then another, opened it. Dominic stood in the hallway, soaked through, rain dripping from his dark hair, and the first words from his mouth weren't accusations or demands. "Is she mine?" The anguish in his voice broke something in Sarah's carefully built walls. He looked older, harder. There were new lines around his eyes, new scars on his knuckles, and something in his expression that hadn't been there 5 years ago. A weariness that went bone deep. But his eyes were the same. That same amber that Emma had inherited, now fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You know she is," Sarah whispered. "You saw her. You know." Dominic's jaw clenched. His hands were fists at his sides, and Sarah could see him fighting for control. Fighting his wolf, who had to be going insane this close to both mate and child after 5 years of searching. "Say it." His voice was rough. "I need to hear you say it. Emma is your daughter." The words came out steadier than Sarah expected. "She's 4 years old. Her birthday is March 15th. She loves strawberries and hates broccoli. She can already read at a 1st grade level. She's brilliant and brave and beautiful, and yes, Dominic, she's yours." Something in his expression cracked. He stepped forward, and Sarah's instincts screamed at her to back away, to maintain distance, to protect herself from the storm she could see building in him. But she held her ground. "You need to leave," she said, even though every fibre of her being was screaming the opposite. "I'll explain everything, but not here, not now. Emma's sleeping, and I won't. I'm not going anywhere." Dominic moved past her into the apartment, and Sarah felt his power wash over her like a physical force. "You had 5 years, Sarah. 5 years of my daughter's life that I'll never get back. 5 years where I didn't know she existed. So no, I'm not leaving until I understand why." He stood in her small living room, too large for the space, too powerful, dripping rain onto her cheap carpet, and Sarah saw his eyes track over everything. The modest furniture, the stack of bills on the counter, the crayon drawings taped to the walls. Emma's artwork, evidence of the life Sarah had built in secret, in hiding, in fear. "This is what you chose?" Dominic's voice was quiet, dangerous. "This? I chose safety, Sarah shot back. I chose keeping our daughter alive. From what? From me? From Richard? The name hung in the air between them like a curse. Dominic went very still. What does Richard have to do with this? Before Sarah could answer, a small voice came from the bedroom doorway. "Mommy, why are you yelling?" They both turned. Emma stood there in her pyjamas, pink with white stars, her rabbit dragging on the floor, her hair mussed from sleep. She blinked in the lamplight, confused, until her eyes landed on Dominic. Then she smiled. Moon Man. Emma's face lit up with pure joy, and before Sarah could stop her, she ran straight to Dominic. "You came. I called, and you came." Emma launched herself at him, and Dominic, this man who'd built a reputation on being untouchable, unbreakable, unmoved, caught her with hands that shook. Emma climbed into his arms like she'd done it 1,000 times before, curling against his chest, and Sarah watched something in Dominic's expression transform. Wonder. Pain. Love so fierce it was almost violent. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, and his voice was wrecked. "I came." "Are you still sad?" Emma touched his face with small hands, studying him with that intensity that was pure Dominic. "Mommy's been sad too. She cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. But maybe now you can both be happy." Dominic's eyes lifted to meet Sarah's over Emma's head, and the devastation in them made Sarah's throat close. This man, this alpha who'd torn apart rival packs and ruled with an iron fist, was being destroyed by a 4-year-old simple observation. "Maybe," Dominic said to Emma, but his gaze never left Sarah. "Would you like that? If your mommy and I weren't sad anymore?" Emma nodded against his shoulder, yawning. "Uh-huh. And maybe we could stop moving all the time. I want to stay somewhere. I want friends." Each word was an arrow through Sarah's heart. "Emma, baby, you need to go back to bed," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The nice man and I need to talk." "Is he going to leave?" Emma tightened her grip on Dominic. "Everyone always leaves." "No." Dominic's answer was immediate. "Absolute. I'm not leaving. Not tonight. Not ever." He looked at Sarah, challenge in his eyes. "Your mommy and I have things to discuss, but I'll be here when you wake up. I promise." Emma studied his face for a long moment, then nodded, satisfied. She let Sarah take her back to bed, but not before making Dominic promise 3 more times that he wouldn't disappear. When Sarah returned to the living room, Dominic was standing at the window, staring out at the storm. His shoulders were rigid, and she could see him fighting for control. "Tell me," he said without turning. "Tell me everything, and don't you dare leave anything out." So Sarah did. She told him about being sent as a spy, about that night at the tavern, about waking to Thorne's warning. She told him about discovering the pregnancy, about Richard's history with Clara, about the plot to use NER as leverage in a coup. "Thorne offered me a deal," Sarah said, her voice steady even as her hands shook. "He'd fake my death, get me to neutral territory, and Richard would have no reason to keep looking. In return, I'd send him information about human-wolf relations. Nothing dangerous, just observations." "And you believed him?" Dominic turned, and the fury in his face made Sarah step back. "You believed that disappearing was the answer? What choice did I have?" Sarah's own anger rose to meet his. Richard had already killed Clara for refusing to be his breeding stock. He was planning a coup, Dominic. If he found out about Emma, if he knew she existed, he would have used her against you, or worse, killed her to eliminate the threat. I was protecting her. I was protecting you. By letting me think you'd abandoned me? Dominic's voice was raw. By letting me believe that you'd found out I was alpha and decided I wasn't worth staying for? Do you have any idea what that did to me, Sarah? Do you have any concept of the last 5 years? Tell me, Sarah challenged. Tell me what you went through while I was raising our daughter alone, looking over my shoulder every day, terrified that Richard would find us. Dominic laughed, and it was the most bitter sound Sarah had ever heard. I drowned. That's what I did. I drowned in guilt and self-hatred and the certainty that I was fundamentally unlovable. I threw myself into being alpha because it was the only thing I had left. I became colder, harder, more ruthless, because if I let myself feel anything, I'd have to face the fact that you'd looked at the real me and chosen to run. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, backing Sarah against the wall. He didn't touch her, but she felt surrounded by him. His heat, his power, his pain. I searched for you, Dominic said quietly. For 6 months I searched. I tracked every lead, followed every rumour. And then Thorne sent word that you'd died in a car accident, that your body had been burned beyond recognition, and his voice broke. I blame myself. I thought I'd scared you away, thought you'd been running from me when you crashed, and it was my fault you were dead. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. Dominic, I mourned you, Sarah. I mourned you, and you were alive. You were alive and pregnant and raising my daughter, and I didn't know. I had a right to know. I was protecting you. I didn't need protection. Dominic slammed his hand against the wall beside her head, making her flinch. I needed you. He stopped, breathing hard, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. I needed to not be alone. The confession hung between them, raw and terrible. Richard's dead, Dominic said after a long moment. I killed him 2 years ago when I found out what he'd been planning, what he'd done to Clara, what he'd been doing to the pack. He met her eyes. You've been running from a ghost, Sarah. For 2 years the threat hasn't existed, and you never checked. You never reached out to see if it was safe to come home. The words hit like a physical blow, because he was right. After Thorne had told her Richard was dead, she could have reached out. Could have sent word, could have given Dominic the chance to know his daughter. But she'd been afraid that Dominic had moved on, that he'd found someone else, that he wouldn't want the complication of a child from a one-night stand with an Omega spy. She'd been a coward. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered. Dominic, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back 5 years. They stood there in the lamplight, the storm raging outside, and Sarah saw the fracture lines running through both of them, all the ways they'd been broken by choices made in fear and desperation. There's more, Dominic said finally. Richard had a son, James. He left the pack years ago, but he's back now, and he's been asking questions about bloodlines, about pack law, about missing members. Dread pooled in Sarah's stomach. What kind of questions? The kind that make me think Richard's conspiracy didn't die with him. Dominic's expression was grim. You and Emma need to come back to Pack Lands, now, where I can protect you both. No, the word was immediate, instinctive. I won't go back to that life, Dominic. I won't let Emma grow up in pack politics, with alphas and betas and omegas and all the hierarchy and control. I left for a reason. You left based on a threat that no longer exists. The threat doesn't matter. Sarah pushed past him, needing space, needing air. I won't be controlled. I won't be owned. I won't. Mommy. They both froze. Emma stood in the bedroom doorway again, tears streaming down her face, her rabbit clutched tight. She looked between them with eyes too old for 4 years. Are you fighting because of me? Emma's voice was small, broken. Is it my fault? No, sweetheart. Sarah started forward, but Emma backed away. You're always sad because of me. We move because of me. And now you're fighting with the Moon Man because of me. Emma's lower lip trembled. I'm sorry I called him. I'm sorry I made everything bad. Emma. No. Dominic dropped to his knees, and Sarah saw him swallow hard before he spoke. None of this is your fault. Your mom and I are just. We're figuring things out, but you haven't done anything wrong. You could never do anything wrong. Emma looked at him with those amber eyes, his eyes, and asked the question that changed everything. "Are you my daddy?" The question hung in the storm-filled air. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the three of them frozen in this moment. Dominic on his knees, Sarah with her hands pressed to her mouth, Emma waiting for an answer that would reshape her entire world. Dominic looked at Sarah. In his eyes, she saw a question, a plea. Let me have this. Let me claim her. Let me be her father. Sarah's heart cracked wide open. She nodded. Dominic turned back to Emma, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and sure, and full of a love so fierce it made Sarah's knees weak. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm your daddy, and I'm not going anywhere ever again. I promise." Emma's face transformed. She flew at Dominic, and he caught her, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Because she was. She was his daughter, and he'd just found out she existed. And Sarah watched this man, this alpha, break and rebuild himself around the reality of fatherhood in the space of a heartbeat. "I have a daddy," Emma whispered against his shoulder. "I have a daddy and he's not going to leave." "Never," Dominic promised. "I'll never leave you, Emma, no matter what." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she watched them. Father and daughter, finally together, 5 years too late, but together nonetheless. Then Dominic's phone rang. He answered it with one hand. Emma still clutched in his other arm. "Marcus, this better be—" He stopped. His expression went cold. "When?" Sarah felt dread coil in her stomach at the tone of his voice. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Dominic ended the call and looked at Sarah, and she saw death in his eyes. Not his death, something worse. "What happened?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "James." Dominic set Emma down gently, smoothing her hair. "James just filed a formal challenge for the alpha position. His grounds are that I've abandoned my bloodline duty by remaining mateless and heirless." He stood, and Sarah felt his power flood the room, not threatening her, but preparing for war. "Pack law requires me to either prove I have an heir and a mate, or fight him to the death." The world tilted. "You have an heir," Sarah said faintly. "Emma. Needs to be formally acknowledged before the pack. And for that to hold legal weight, her mother needs to be my recognized mate." Dominic's eyes met hers. "We have 72 hours before the challenge begins. 72 hours to return to Packlands, formally acknowledge Emma, and either complete the mate bond or prepare for a fight that could cost me everything." Sarah felt sick. "This is my fault. If I'd never left, if I'd never hidden her, if you'd never left, Richard might have killed you both." Dominic crossed to her, tilted her chin up until she had to meet his eyes. "This isn't your fault, Sarah. This is James continuing his father's schemes. But I need you to come back with me. I need you to trust me to keep you both safe. And if I say no," the question was barely a whisper, "then I fight, and maybe I win, and maybe I don't. But either way, Emma grows up knowing her father tried." He cupped her face with both hands. "But I'm asking you, Sarah, please come home. Let me protect my family. My family." The words hung between them, full of promise and threat, and a future Sarah had never let herself imagine. She looked at Emma, who was watching them both with wide eyes, looked at Dominic, who'd just found out he was a father and was already preparing to die to protect his child, looked at the small apartment that had been their hiding place, their prison, their safety, and she realized that running had never made them safe. It had just made them alone. "Okay," Sarah heard herself say, "we'll come with you, but Dominic, this doesn't mean I'm agreeing to the mate bond. This doesn't mean I'm going to be controlled or owned or—" "I don't want to control you," Dominic said quietly. "I never did. I just want you alive, both of you." Outside, the storm was reaching its peak, thunder and lightning warring across the sky. And inside this small apartment, 3 lives that had been fractured by secrets and fear and desperate choices were beginning, impossibly, to come together. But as Sarah started gathering their things, as Emma chattered excitedly about meeting more people, like the Moon Man, as Dominic made calls to Marcus about security and safe routes, one thought kept circling through Sarah's mind. They were walking into the very danger she'd spent 5 years running from, and this time there would be nowhere left to hide. Chapter 4, The Shadowridge Pack Estate, was nothing like Sarah had imagined. She'd expected cold stone and harsh lines, something that matched the rumours of Dominic's ruthless reputation. Instead, the main house was warm wood and large windows, with a sprawling garden that Emma had immediately claimed as her kingdom. It had been 2 days since they'd arrived, 2 days of watching her daughter bloom under her father's attention, 2 days of Dominic keeping a careful distance while Sarah's wolf howled for something she couldn't name. 1 day, left until the challenge. Sarah stood at the window of the room Dominic had given her, separate from his, because he'd understood without being told that she needed space, and watched Emma chase butterflies while Marcus kept a discreet guard nearby. Her daughter's laughter carried on the wind, bright and free in a way Sarah had never heard before, because Emma had never been safe enough to laugh like that. She's happy. Sarah turned to find Dominic in the doorway, not entering without invitation, always careful not to push. He'd been like that for 2 days, present but not demanding, offering but not insisting. It was driving her slowly insane. She is, Sarah agreed. She keeps asking when she can go to the pack school, when she can meet the other children. She can meet them whenever you're ready. Dominic leaned against the doorframe, and Sarah tried not to notice how the afternoon light caught in his dark hair, how his eyes tracked over her with a hunger he thought he was hiding. The pack is curious about her? About you? Curious if I'm going to save you from having to fight James, you mean? Something flashed across Dominic's expression. I told you, I'll fight him. I'll win. You don't have to. Don't. Sarah crossed to him, stopping just out of reach. Don't pretend this isn't about me. Don't pretend that if I just accepted the mate bond, did the public ceremony, acknowledged Emma as your heir, that James's challenge wouldn't dissolve instantly. And I told you I won't pressure you into a bond you don't want. Dominic's voice was steady, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. I meant it, Sarah. You owe me nothing. I owe you 5 years. You owe me nothing, he repeated more firmly. You did what you thought you had to do to protect our daughter. I may not agree with your choices, but I understand them. And I won't compound that by forcing you into pack law, into a role you never wanted, just to save my life. Sarah stared at him, at this man who'd built a reputation on being untouchable and ruthless, who was offering to die rather than trap her in a bond she might not want. You're an idiot, she said softly. Dominic's lips twitched. So, I've been told. Before Sarah could respond, Emma's voice rang out from the garden. Daddy, come see. I found a blue butterfly. Daddy. Emma had taken to the word, like she'd been born saying it, and every time she used it, Sarah watched Dominic transform, the cold alpha melting into something softer, warmer, better. Go, Sarah said. She's waiting. Dominic hesitated, then nodded and headed for the garden. Sarah watched from the window as Emma launched herself at him, chattering about the butterfly, about the flowers, about everything. And Dominic listened like her words were the most important thing in the world. Sarah's chest ached. She'd told herself for 5 years that she was protecting them both, that Dominic was better off without the complication of a child, that Emma was safer hidden away. But watching them now, watching Emma's face light up whenever Dominic walked into a room, watching Dominic soften in ways Sarah suspected he hadn't in years, she realised what she'd actually done. She'd stolen this from them. 5 years of butterfly hunts and bedtime stories and ordinary moments that could never be recovered. And now she had one day to decide if she was going to let Packlaw steal even more. That evening, after Emma was asleep in the room next to Syrah's, a room Dominic had somehow managed to fill with stuffed animals and books and everything a little girl could want, Sarah found Marcus in Dominic's study. "I need to talk to you," she said without preamble, "about James." Marcus looked up from the papers he'd been reviewing, his expression carefully neutral. "What about him?" "Tell me the truth. Can Dominic beat him?" "In a fair fight, without question." Marcus set down his pen. "But I don't think it's going to be a fair fight." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his words. Then he sighed. "I shouldn't be telling you this. Dominic would have my head if he knew, but—" He met her eyes. "We've intercepted communications. James has been gathering allies, and there are rumours he's planning to use methods that were banned by Packlaw decades ago." "What kind of methods?" "Poisoned claws, designed to weaken even an alpha. It's cowardly and illegal, but if he can hide it well enough, if he can make it look like a fair victory—" Marcus's jaw tightened. "And there's more. We have intelligence that suggests he's planning to target you and Emma during the fight. Create a distraction that would leave Dominic vulnerable." Rage flooded through Sarah, hot and violent. He would threaten a child? He would do whatever it takes to win, just like his father. Marcus stood, coming around the desk. "Which is why you need to accept the bond, Sarah. I know you don't want Packlaw. I know you don't want to be Luna, but—" "Has Dominic told you to say this?" "Dominic doesn't know I'm talking to you. He'd be furious if he found out." Marcus's expression was grim. "He's convinced he can protect you both regardless, that he can win this fight and keep you safe, and somehow make everything work out through sheer force of will. But I've been his beta for 3 years, and I've never seen him like this. Distracted, divided, terrified. Dominic isn't afraid of anything. He's afraid of losing you and Emma." Marcus's words were quiet but devastating. "He just found out he has a daughter. He just got you back. And tomorrow he might have to die protecting you both because Packlaw says he's vulnerable without a mate and heir. Don't let his pride destroy him, Sarah. Don't let him die when you have the power to save him." Sarah felt her hand shake. "If I accept the bond, I'm trapped. I become Luna. I become subject to pack hierarchy. You become someone who can change those things," Marcus interrupted. "You think Dominic wants the old ways? He's been fighting against them for years. But he can't reform everything alone, and he especially can't do it if James takes over. James will drag us back to the brutal hierarchy his father wanted. But if you stand with Dominic, if you become Luna and use that power, you could help him build something better." The words hung in the air between them. Before Sarah could respond, Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression went dark. "What?" Sarah demanded. "Thorn. He's here with the Riverside delegation." Marcus looked at her. "He's asking to see you." Sarah met Thorn in a neutral room, with Marcus standing guard outside. The alpha who'd offered her protection 5 years ago looked older now, grey threading through his hair, but his eyes were the same, calculating, cold. "Sarah," Thorn smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "You look well. Motherhood suits you." "Cut the pleasantries." Sarah kept her voice level. "Why are you here?" "For the challenge, of course. All the regional alphas were invited to witness." Thorn moved around the room like he owned it. "I have to say I'm impressed. You managed to land on your feet quite spectacularly. The feared Dominic Kane's secret daughter, his long-lost mate. Quite the story." Something in his tone made Sarah's skin crawl. "What do you want, Thorn?" "I want to remind you of our agreement, the one we made 5 years ago." Thorn turned to face her. "I protected you, Sarah. I kept you safe. I gave you a new life. And in return, I sent you information about human-wolf relations." Sarah's wolf was growling now. Harmless observations. That was the deal. And you've been so good about it, so faithful. Thorne's smile widened. All that information you sent about human territories, about security weak points, about the best routes for moving through neutral zones, very useful. Dread pooled in Sarah's stomach. What did you do with that information? I shared it with my sister, of course. Family is important, don't you think? Thorne's expression was pleasant, conversational. She's been so worried about her son. James needed every advantage he could get if he was going to take on Dominic Kane. The world tilted. Your sister, Sarah said faintly, James's mother. Yes, we've been planning this for years, actually. Richard's death was unfortunate, but James is smarter than his father, more patient. Thorne moved closer. And you, dear Sarah, have been helping us all along. Every piece of information you sent, every observation about Dominic's movements, his patterns, invaluable. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. You used me. You made me think I was protecting Emma and Dominic, but you were just using you? Yes? Thorne's smile was cruel now. Did you really think I helped you out of kindness? You were an Omega who got pregnant by one of the most powerful alphas in the territory. You were a tool waiting to be picked up. And when the time was right, when Emma was old enough to be useful leverage, when James was ready to make his move, well, here we are. Rage flooded through Sarah, hot and blinding. Her wolf surged forward, and she felt her eyes flash amber. You threatened my daughter. You used her as bait. I ensured she survived long enough to be useful. Thorne was unconcerned. And now you have a choice, Sarah. Accept the mate bond, acknowledge Emma, and save Dominic from a fight he can't win. Or refuse, let him die, and watch James become alpha. Either way, we win. Either you're Luna, and we have leverage over Shadow Ridge through your daughter, or Dominic is dead and James rules. The only question is which outcome you prefer. Sarah stared at him, at this alpha who pretended to be her saviour while using her as a weapon against the man she loved. The man she loved. The realization hit her like lightning. She loved Dominic. Not just the memory of one perfect night, but the man he'd become. The father who read Emma bedtime stories. The alpha who was willing to die rather than trap her. The mate who'd never stopped being hers, even when she'd run. And she'd be damned if she let Thorne's conspiracy destroy him. You're right, Sarah said quietly. I do have a choice. Thorne's expression turned smug. I'm glad you're seeing reason. Get out. Sarah's voice was ice. Get out before I forget that killing a visiting alpha would cause a territory war. Thorne's smile faded. Sarah, out. Now. Before I change my mind. He left, but his parting words echoed in the room. You can't win this. No matter what you choose, we've already won. Sarah stood there in the empty room, shaking with rage and fear and a determination that burned like wildfire. Then she went to find Dominic. The challenge arena was carved into natural stone, open to the sky, ringed with seating for pack members and visiting delegations. By tradition, challenges happened at sunset, something about the moon witnessing justice. Sarah thought the moon had a sick sense of humour. She stood in the family section with Emma, who was blessedly unaware of what was about to happen, chattering about the big party everyone had gathered for. Marcus stood nearby, tense and ready. All around them, the pack filled the seats, their energy a tangible thing. Anticipation, worry, fear. In the centre of the arena, Dominic and James faced each other. James was younger, faster, with the lean build of a wolf who relied on speed. But there was something wrong in his eyes, something cruel that reminded Sarah too much of what she'd heard about Richard. This is exciting, Mommy. Emma bounced in her seat. Is Daddy going to dance? Something like that, baby. Sarah's hands were white-knuckled on the railing. She could smell it now. The poison on James's claws, subtle but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. And scattered through the crowd, she spotted James's allies, their attention fixed not on the challenge circle, but on her and Emma. They were going to attack. The moment Dominic was engaged, they'd move. Sarah had maybe seconds to make her choice. She looked at Dominic, at the man who'd never stopped being hers, who stood in that circle ready to die, rather than force her hand. And she understood with crystal clarity that if pack law demanded she claim him publicly to save his life, then the moon herself wouldn't stop her. The challenge officiant, an elder alpha from a neutral pack, began the ritual words. "We gather to witness a challenge for the position of Shadow Ridge Alpha. James Blackwood claims that Alpha Dominic Kane has failed in his bloodline duty, remaining mateless and heirless, and is therefore unfit to lead. Does anyone contest these claims?" Sarah stood. The arena went silent. "I contest them." Her voice rang out clear and strong. "I, Sarah Mitchell, invoke the Luna's claim." Shock rippled through the crowd. The Luna's claim was ancient, rarely used, and absolutely binding. It allowed a mate to intercede in a challenge by publicly claiming the alpha as hers. Dominic's head whipped toward her, his eyes wide with shock and something that looked like panic. "Sarah, no." But she was already moving, already walking down the stairs toward the challenge circle. The officiant looked stunned, but couldn't refuse. The Luna's claim was written into the oldest pack laws. Sarah stepped into the circle, walked right up to Dominic, and placed her hand over his heart, feeling it pound beneath her palm. "I claim Dominic Kane as my mate," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I acknowledge Emma as our shared heir, born of our bond. I accept the position of Luna of Shadow Ridge Pack, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." The mate bond, dormant for 5 years, snapped into place with devastating force. Sarah gasped as it flooded through her, Dominic's strength, his fear, his fierce love, his absolute terror at what she was doing. She felt his wolf recognize hers, felt the connection they'd forged 5 years ago roar back to life, and it was overwhelming and perfect and right. Dominic caught her as her knees buckled. "Sarah, what did you do?" His voice was raw. "You didn't have to—" "I chose this," she said, holding his gaze. "I chose you. I chose us. And I'll be damned if I let Thorne's conspiracy destroy our family." Understanding flashed across his face, followed by fury. But before he could respond, James snarled from across the circle. "This is invalid. She can't just—" "She can." The officiant's voice was firm. "The Luna's claim is absolute. The challenge is dissolved. Dominic Kane has a mate and an acknowledged heir. There are no grounds for—" "Then I challenge her." James pointed at Sarah, his face twisted with rage. "She's Omega. She can't—" "She's a mother defending her child," Sarah interrupted, and her voice was deadly calm. "And I invoke a mother's right to challenge any who threaten her offspring." The crowd erupted. A mother's right was even older than the Luna's claim, an ancient law that said any wolf, regardless of rank, could challenge someone who threatened their children. James's face went white. "You can't fight me. You're Omega. You'll die. Then you should accept the challenge." Sarah smiled, and it was all teeth. "Unless you're afraid of an Omega." The trap was perfect. If James refused, he'd be labelled a coward. If he accepted, he'd be fighting someone the pack now saw as their Luna, defending her child. Either way, he lost face. But James was too enraged to see it. "Fine, I accept. And when I tear you apart, the pack will see exactly what kind of weak Luna Dominic has chosen." "Sarah, no." Dominic grabbed her arm. "You can't fight him. He'll kill you." She looked up at him, at the mate bond blazing between them, and smiled. "Trust me." Then she stepped away from him, to the center of the circle, and let her wolf rise. The shift usually hurt, usually felt like being torn apart and rebuilt. But this time, with the mate bond singing through her veins, with the absolute certainty that she was fighting for her family, it felt like coming home. Sarah's wolf form should have been small, submissive. Omega wolves were built for support, not combat. Everyone knew that. But the wolf that stood in the challenge circle was silver, pure silver, from nose to tail, with eyes that glowed like moonlight and a presence that made even the alphas in the crowd lean back. The pack gasped. Dominic made a sound like he'd been punched, because silver wolves were legend. Rare bloodline power that appeared once in a generation, marking wolves of immense potential. And Sarah, who'd been told she was weak, who'd been hidden away, who'd been used as a pawn, was one of them. Thorn, watching from the delegation seats, looked like he'd seen a ghost. James shifted into his wolf form, large, dark, powerful. He circled Sarah, looking for weaknesses, and she saw the moment he dismissed her as a real threat despite the silver coat. Saw him prepare to lunge with those poisoned claws extended, and when he struck, Sarah wasn't there. She was faster than she'd ever been, the mate bond amplifying her natural speed. And she used it. Used every instinct she'd suppressed for years, every bit of power she'd been told to hide. She didn't fight James with strength. She couldn't match his raw power. But she didn't need to. She fought with speed and strategy, staying just out of reach, letting him tire himself with wild strikes. And when he overextended, when his guard dropped for just a moment, she struck, not at his throat like he expected, but at his shoulder, taking out the leg and sending him crashing to the ground. The poisoned claws scattered across the arena floor, visible now to everyone. The pack roared in outrage. Poisoned weapons were forbidden. James had just condemned himself in front of every alpha in the region. Sarah stood over him, her silver wolf form glowing in the fading sunlight, and she didn't kill him. That was important. She could have, the crowd would have understood, but she showed mercy, showed that a Luna could be strong without being brutal, could win without becoming the monsters they fought. She shifted back to human form, breathing hard, and looked at the officiant. I've defended my right as Mother and Luna. James Blackwood used poisoned weapons in a sacred challenge. I leave his judgment to the Alpha Council. The officiant looked shaken, but nodded. James Blackwood is stripped of his challenge rights and will face council judgment for breaking sacred law. Dominic Kane remains Alpha of Shadow Ridge Pack. Sarah Mitchell is recognised as his Luna and Emma Kane as his acknowledged heir. The pack erupted in cheers. Sarah barely heard them. She was watching Dominic, who stood at the edge of the circle looking at her like she'd hung the moon. He crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, not caring that they had an audience, not caring about anything except that she was there. She was his. She'd claimed him in front of everyone. You're insane, he said against her hair. You're brilliant and terrifying and completely insane. I prefer bold. Sarah pulled back to look at him, and I meant what I said. I chose this. I chose you. But Dominic, I'm not going to be a Luna who just follows the old ways. I'm going to change things. Reform the laws that hurt people like me, protect the vulnerable, and make this pack into something better. Good. Dominic cupped her face with both hands. Because I've been waiting 5 years to ask you this properly. Sarah Mitchell, will you be my mate, my Luna? My partner in building something better than what we inherited? Sarah felt tears stream down her face. Yes, to all of it. Yes. He kissed her then, and the mate bond blazed between them like wildfire, and the pack roared approval. And somewhere in the stands, Emma was asking Marcus why Mommy and Daddy were hugging so tight. Later, after the celebrations died down, after Thorn and his delegation had left in disgrace, after James had been taken into custody by the Alpha Council, Sarah and Dominic stood in Emma's room watching their daughter sleep. She doesn't even know what happened today, Sarah said softly. She will. Dominic wrapped his arms around her from behind. When she's older, we'll tell her how her mother saved everyone, how she became the silver wolf nobody saw coming. Thorn hid it from me. All those years, He knew what I was and he kept it secret, kept me thinking I was weak. You were never weak. Dominic turned her to face him. You survived 5 years alone with our daughter. You protected her from conspiracies and threats I didn't even know existed. You walked into a challenge circle against someone twice your size and won with nothing but speed and strategy. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Sarah smiled. And you're the man who was willing to die rather than trap me in a bond I didn't want. I'd do it again, Dominic said seriously. If you ever want out, if this life becomes too much, stop. Sarah put her hand over his mouth. I chose this. I'm choosing it now. I'll choose it tomorrow. And if I ever need you to fight for me, I trust you'll do it. But I'm not running anymore, Dominic. This is home. You're home. He kissed her palm, and the mate bond hummed between them, and they stood there in their daughter's room, feeling like maybe, finally, everything was going to be okay. 6 months later, Emma's 5th birthday party was chaos in the best possible way. The pack house was full of children and laughter and more birthday cake than any one child could possibly need. Emma held court like the little princess she was, telling everyone who would listen about the day I found Daddy and made our family complete. Sarah stood with Dominic, watching their daughter, and felt peace settle in her bones. She'd spent the last 6 months reforming Shadowridge Pack from the inside, changing laws that had hurt Omegas, establishing protections for vulnerable pack members, creating systems that rewarded cooperation over brutal hierarchy. Some of the older pack members grumbled, but most had embraced the changes, and word had spread. Other packs were watching, wondering if change was possible in their territories too, which was why Sarah wasn't surprised when Marcus approached with a letter. This just arrived, he said, handing it to her, from the Northern Ridge Pack. Sarah read it quickly, then smiled. It was a request. Would Luna Sarah be willing to consult with them about their own corruption problems? Would she share her reforms, help them build something better? They want help, she said to Dominic. He looked at the letter, then at her, and smiled. Are you going to give it to them? Yes. Sarah felt certainty settle in her chest. This is what I'm meant to do. Not just change Shadowridge, but help change pack culture everywhere. Make sure no one else has to run and hide like I did. Then we'll do it together. Dominic pulled her close. Luna Sarah, Mitchell Kane, reformer and revolutionary. That's a terrible title. You'll think of a better one. Emma ran over then, chocolate cake smeared on her face, demanding that Mommy and Daddy come see her presents. And as they followed their daughter back into the chaos of the party, Sarah felt the mate bond blazing strong between them, felt the certainty that this, all of this, was exactly where she was meant to be. She'd spent 5 years running from pack life, from Dominic, from herself. But sometimes running led you exactly where you needed to go, and sometimes coming home meant becoming something more than you'd ever imagined possible. The Silver Wolf had finally found her pack, and she was just getting started. In a distant territory, an Omega mother watched her daughter play and wondered if change was possible. Then she heard about a Luna called the Silver Wolf who'd challenged pack law and won, who was reforming everything from the inside, and she dared, for the first time in years, to hope. The revolution had begun. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share and subscribe for more.